middle of the night on June 9th, 1912, a family of 6 and their 2 visitors were murdered in Villisca, Iowa. They were bludgeoned to death by someone with an axe, and to this very day, their murders remain unsolved. Villisca was a small town with a population of 1,107. In this town lived the Moore family, the father Josiah Moore, the mother Sarah, and their 4 children, 11-year-old Herman Montgomery, 10-year-old Mary Catherine, 7-year-old Arthur Boyd, and the youngest child, Paul, age 5. On June 9th, before the time of the murders, the Moores attended a service for children at their Presbyterian church called the Children's State Program. The entire family attended the event. When the church services ended around 9:30 p.m., Catherine Moore invited her 2 friends, Ina Mae Stillinger, age 8, and Lena Gertrude Stillinger, age 12, to spend the night at their house because the sisters were afraid to walk home in the dark. Josiah called their residence to ask their parents' permission and got a hold of their older sister Blanche, who said their parents were out, but that she would give them the message. When the arrangements were made, they left the church by foot and arrived at their house between 9:45 and 10 p.m. The next morning, their neighbor Mary Peckham was in her yard hanging laundry around 5 a.m. when she noticed that nobody was awake at the Moore's house yet, which was unusual. Around 7 a.m., she became concerned when no one came out of the house to do their regular chores. She went ahead and let the Moore's chickens out of their coop, then called Josiah's brother Ross Moore. When Ross arrived, he tried knocking and shouting through the door, but got no response. He also couldn't see into the house because the window shades had been pulled down. He eventually used a spare key to gain entry into the home. Inside, he discovered 2 bloody bodies covered by a sheet in the bed of the guest's bedroom, and blood was splattered on the headboard of the bed. He ran outside and immediately phoned Joe's hardware store and asked an employee to alert the town's marshal, Henry Hank Horton, that something terrible had happened. Hank arrived at the house around 8:30 a.m. and began his inspection. There was an uneaten plate of food on the kitchen table next to a pot of bloody water. All the mirrors in the house, and even the glass in the doors, had been covered with clothing that the killer had found by digging through the Moore's dressers. The axe used for the murders was partially wiped clean and lying against the wall in the guest bedroom, with a 4-pound slab of bacon wrapped in cloth sitting next to it. The 2 bedrooms that the Moore family occupied had axe marks on the ceiling. Investigators knew these marks were from the attack because there were dust particles on the surface of the bed. This left some to speculate that the killer was swinging the axe around in a violent frenzy. Josiah Moore was the only person that had obvious slices on his unrecognizable face from the sharp end of the weapon. The rest of the victims had been beaten to death with the blunt side of the axe. The parents had their heads struck at least 20 to 30 times, and there was evidence that the killer had gone to their room twice. After the murderer had delivered the fatal blows to everyone's heads, they went to the parents' rooms to do more damage. Josiah Moore was completely crushed from his upper jaw and up. There was blood, brain tissue, and skull fragments splattered all over the front of the bed's headboard. In the guest room, Lena Stillinger was hanging a third of the way out of the bed, her nightgown pulled up above her waist, and her underwear thrown under the bed. Blood and brain tissue was on her pillow, and there were conclusions that the killer pulled her down the bed. Some think she may have been the only one who woke up because of the position she was in, while others think that the killer placed her this way after he killed her. Her sister Ina was on the right side of the bed, facing left towards Lena, with her hips rotated so that her bottom was facing the right side of the wall. It's been concluded that the killer placed them this way for his viewing pleasure, although doctors concluded all of the Moore children seemed to have slept through the killings. They were killed by blunt force trauma to the head. The marshal went back outside to Ross Moore and said, "My God, Ross, there's somebody murdered in every bed." He went back into town to get the doctor, and while he was there, made the grave mistake of mentioning the murders to some townspeople. Word spread like wildfire. Stores shut down, people told neighbors any way they could, and it wasn't long before the Moore's property became a madhouse. About over 100 people invaded the home to gawk at the bodies, and others shouted from room to room. The marshal tried to get the situation under control, but when you would get people out one door, more would come pouring in through another. Over 100 years later, after the murders took place, in June 2009, One visitor visited the new renovated home now owned by Darwin and Martha Lynn and attempted to make contact with the Stillinger girls in the very room in which their lives were shockingly cut short. The visitor called out to the girls, asking them to turn his flashlight on and off. Surprisingly, they obliged every time, causing him to proclaim, he said, "I believe the spirits of all 8 of the victims still dwell within that house." A caretaker named Johnny Hauser had his own paranormal experience at the house up in the kids' room. He said, "I'm up in the kids' room, and I lock the kitchen door so nobody can walk in, and as I'm up there, somebody walks in the house. After hearing the sound of the trespassing, he decided to pull a prank that would set the spirits straight." Hauser said that he hid in the kids' closet until finally whoever was in the house went upstairs. He kicked the door open and screamed, but there was nothing at all. As soon as he saw there was nothing, he said it just sucked the air out of him, like he got the wind knocked out of him. While some investigators believe the presence of the family are haunting the house, multiple others believe that the house is also haunted by the killer themselves. Investigators from the TV show Kindred Spirits picked up an EVP recording to the question, "Did you do something to this family?" The response they got, "I killed them." A medium picked up the presence of the killer in the house, describing him as giddy about what he was about to do, and saying that his favorite kind of person was a person that was weak and easily manipulated, like putty in his hands. Investigators believe that the killer is haunting the upstairs attic, which was believed where the killer was at the time, hiding before the murders took place. A final experience took place on November 7th, 2014, when Johnny Hauser, the caretaker, checked in a man who was in his 50s along with his elderly parents into the house. Hauser noted that the man was carrying a large hunting knife on his belt. Suddenly, the next morning, Hauser noted that the man, who was apparently in the house alone, had been stabbed in the downstairs bedroom the night before. The knife was stabbed into his chest, and he laid in a big puddle of his own blood until he was found. The man's injuries were labeled as self-inflicted. Luckily, the man survived the attack and even returned to the house years later. When it came to describing what happened that night, all the man could remember was going into that room alone with the goal of provoking the spirits, and all he could remember was waking up in an emergency room. Hauser noted that the first thing the man did was apologize to the house for his behavior. Hauser didn't believe that a ghost stabbed the man, but he did believe that the house had a dangerous effect on people and their mental state while inside. After 5 years of gossip and paranormal investigating in this 2-story house, we'll never know what took place in this 2-story house, which resulted in the loss of 8 innocent lives, or if the residents of this house, who once called it home over 100 years ago, still roam it to this day. We'll never know what's making this place haunted up to this day, but we do know that the Villisca Ax murders was one of the most infamous cold cases in American history.